On October 4th, 1957, a basketball-sized metal sphere launched into orbit, and America panicked. The Soviet Union had beaten them to space. What happened next would become the most expensive, most dangerous, and most audacious engineering sprint in human history. 12 years, 400,000 engineers, one moon. Here's what we're covering today. How a single beeping satellite triggered a national identity crisis, how America built a space agency from scratch and raced to catch up, why the missions nobody talks about were the ones that actually mattered, and how a 12-year sprint to the moon left behind a legacy that still shapes the world we live in right now. One beep changed everything. Sputnik was deceptively simple. A polished aluminum sphere about the size of a basketball, 58 centimeters across, weighing 83 kilograms. It had 4 antennas, a radio transmitter, and a battery. That was it. No cameras, no sensors, no scientific instruments worth speaking of. Its only job was to exist up there, and to beep. But that beep echoing across the sky meant something enormous. It meant the Soviets had built a rocket powerful enough to escape Earth's atmosphere and achieve orbit. And if they could put a basketball in orbit, they could put a nuclear warhead over New York. The reaction in America was immediate and visceral. Congress went into emergency session. Newspapers ran headlines with the words like Pearl Harbor of the skies. Scientists who had been quietly working on rocket programs found themselves suddenly the most important people in the country. The truth was uncomfortable. The Soviet rocket program, led by a brilliant engineer named Sergei Korolev, whose identity was kept so secret that even most Soviets didn't know his name, had been quietly outpacing American efforts for years. While the US had been splitting its rocket development across competing military branches with no unified vision, Korolev had been singularly focused. He wanted to reach space. Sputnik was his proof that he could. The American response went beyond rhetoric. Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into science and math education almost overnight. Schools rewrote curricula, universities expanded physics and engineering programs. A generation of American students was told, in no uncertain terms, that the fate of the country depended on them learning calculus. And then, America created NASA. Sputnik didn't just launch a satellite, it launched a national identity crisis, and that crisis became rocket fuel. America needed a space program, fast. And it needed one that wasn't run by the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force all pulling in different directions. In July 1958, less than a year after Sputnik, President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act into law. NASA was born, absorbing NACA, the old National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, along with its engineers, its test facilities, and its institutional knowledge of flight. Within months, NASA drafted 7 military test pilots and introduced them to the world as the Mercury 7, the men who would fly America into space. Their names were Shepard, Grissom, Glenn, Carpenter, Schirra, Cooper, and Slayton. They were treated like rock stars. They were on the cover of Life magazine. Children wrote them letters. America needed heroes, and NASA gave them 7. The Mercury program had one goal: put a human in space before the Soviets did. They didn't make it. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a 27-year-old Soviet Air Force pilot with a disarming smile, climbed into a spherical capsule called Vostok 1 and became the first human being in space. He orbited the Earth once in 8 minutes and landed safely in a field in Russia. But 23 days later, Alan Shepard climbed into Freedom 7 and became the first American in space. And President Kennedy stood before Congress and drew a line: "We choose to go to the moon." Not because it was easy, because the difficulty was the point. Getting to the moon wasn't one problem, it was 100, and almost none of them had been solved yet. Project Gemini ran from 1961 to 1966, and it existed for one reason: to answer every question that stood between Earth and the moon. 10 crewed missions, in less than 2 years, each one pushing further, testing more, failing fast, and learning faster. How do you rendezvous with another spacecraft in orbit? Gemini 6 and 7 did it in December 1965, 2 capsules flying within a foot of each other at 17,000 miles per hour. How do you dock 2 spacecraft together? Gemini 8 did it in 1966, though the mission was nearly fatal when a thruster malfunction sent the docked vehicles spinning. Neil Armstrong manually corrected it and brought the crew home. How long can a human body survive in weightlessness? Gemini 7 kept 2 astronauts up for 14 days, answer confirmed. Meanwhile, across 20,000 companies and 6 million individual parts, engineers were building the Saturn V, 363 feet tall, generating 7.6 million pounds of thrust, the most powerful rocket ever successfully flown, to this day. Gemini was the practice run nobody talks about, but without it, Apollo never happens. Apollo almost ended before it began. On January 27, 1967, 3 astronauts climbed into the Apollo 1 command module for a routine test. A fire broke out in the pure oxygen atmosphere. All 3 were dead within 17 seconds. NASA stopped, investigated, rebuilt the capsule, 1,400 changes to the design. The program was delayed by 21 months, and when it came back different. Apollo 8 flew in December 1968, the first crewed spacecraft to orbit another world. On Christmas Eve, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders orbited the moon and read from Genesis while 500 million people listened. Bill Anders took a photograph called Earthrise, Earth rising above the gray lunar horizon. It changed how humanity saw itself. Then came Apollo 11, July 16, 1969. 4 days later, Armstrong and Aldrin descended in the Eagle lander while Collins orbited alone above. The guidance computer threw alarms. The landing zone was covered in boulders. Armstrong took manual control, flew past them, and set down with 25 seconds of fuel remaining. The Eagle has landed. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Time on July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. 600 million people watched. The Soviets said nothing. The space race didn't end there. It transformed. Apollo gave us memory foam, water filtration, scratch-resistant lenses. 6 more missions landed on the moon. Apollo 13 nearly killed 3 men, and didn't because of ingenuity and coffee. The space race was never just about space. It was a proxy war fought with math, engineering, and courage. And its winners were all of us. From a beeping Soviet satellite to boot prints on the moon in 12 years. 400,000 people. Most of their names you'll never know. Links above for the Apollo guidance computer video 4 kilobytes guiding humans to another world.